Hello. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, that's the energy. How are you all? These are the hardcore fans. I love it. Good morning to this third day of Macondo Lit Fest. It's so lovely to see you all here. Have you been having a good time? Wow. By the way, this is my favorite panel every year at Macondo. Kenya Rights has been happening since 2022, and it's now become a Macondo tradition. And normally I'm there with you sitting in the audience, and today I get to be the host of this conversation. And I'm so excited, and I really just hope that I get to do justice to these incredible, incredible writers on stage with me. And we will give you, as always, time at the end to ask questions. I promise to be generous and not a selfish host. My name is Aleya Kassam. Welcome, everyone. We are I'm going to put my reading glasses on. This is the Kenya Rights panel. I'll give you a little bit of a description about what we're hoping to cover today and then introduce our wonderful panel here. Today, we're talking with Dorphanage, Natasha Muhanji, and Dorechi as they explore how a new generation is thinking about voice, structure, and emotional truth. What are these writers responding to in the environments, socially, culturally, imaginatively? How are they bending or breaking inherited forms to reflect the nuance of contemporary African life? And what currents of feeling or inquiry run through this body of new work? On my extreme left, we have Dorechi, and I'd like to introduce him to you, excuse me. Writer of tales that linger and lover of lyrical prose, he writes poetry, microfiction, and short stories, often exploring psychological horror. His short story, A Room Full of Teddy Bears, was shortlisted for the 2025 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Can we please give him the huge Macondo congratulations? Because he got our feeders and toes and eyes and everything for a win, Dorechi. And on his Substack, Let Me Pen You, is a space where he's crafting stories, poems, and prose that reach into the heart and linger in the mind. From atmospheric horror to reflective poetry to lyrical escape. A warm welcome to you, Dorechi. And then we have Natasha Muhanji, who is a writer and poet who's widely experimental. Her work has appeared in Brittle Paper, the Kalahari Review, Writers Space Africa, Who, What, Where, KE, Second Skin Mag, the Kwani and Love Made in Africa anthology. She is already prolific. She was the 2023 Sondeka Awards Short Story Prize winner. She writes at her Substack, Automated Nat, and WordPress on Bibliophilic Mistress. She is also a gamer and voiceover artist. Welcome, Natasha. And then we have Dorphanage, poet, writer, spoken word artist. Dorphanage has been called a gifted lyrical virtuoso, a blender of verse, hip hop, theater, music, and improv in his mission to be a truth teller, a historian of self and society. His spoken word performances travel from the anguish of the personal to the uncertainties of living in a broken world. He tells the stories of the forgotten, the scarred, and the disenfranchised peoples, from the juicy bustle of Meru's Gakoromene market to the mad flavors of Eastland's Nairobi. Karibu Dorphanage. All right, should we get into the meat? So I guess my first question for all of you would be, and maybe we can start with you, Dorphanage, is how do you find yourself writing in the forms that you write? Can you take us through that journey?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for being here. I think I would say I like to think the way I look at it is that my way into poetry was through music, and specifically hip hop music. Well, the way we studied poetry in school was brutal, right? You know, I think most people can agree on that, right? And 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 so for me, I didn't fancy it that way. It didn't feel close enough to me, right? So the way that words came to me, found their way to my space in a way that it resonated was through hip hop music. That's how poetry came to me. Poetry came to me in Timberland boots, denim, baggy trousers, and baggy t-shirts. That's how poetry came to me. You know, like that's how I resonated with it most. That's how I found it resonant, and I found it making sense to me. You know, it didn't come to me through Shakespeare and, you know, all the other great writers who have come to enjoy a bit later now that you know, I started writing myself. But the people that drew me to poetry were, the street poets, whether it's from the States or whether it's from Dandora, Nairobi, like those are the people that made sense to me. And I think even when I write, that comes out a lot, because the lyricism that, they projected and articulated in the music is the same that inspires me when I write, and that's how I try to articulate my voice, in a way that is not necessarily clean cut and and formal, but in a way that makes captures the human experience in its rawest, really, right? And so I think that's the voice for me, is making sure that I'm not just writing to people who have bachelors in literature and that kind of thing, but just everyday people, really. Like it's more about the usefulness of my work than it is about the aesthetics of it, right?
And even though you say, even though you say, it's about the usefulness as opposed to the aesthetics, you have like a very specific, I think, aesthetic. How would you describe it? Or would you describe it?
I don't know. It's this. Like it's defiant. It's arrogant to an extent, and it's and it's vulnerable, right? Because I a lot of the art that has always resonated with me has always been vulnerable art, where like people are bearing their hearts out, and because I grew up a very shy kid, don't let the looks fool you, and but the writing, the speaking of my words is what drew me out of that cocoon, right? And that, because I felt, even when I was a shy kid that wasn't speaking out a lot, I felt like I had so much I wanted to say, like I have so much I want to say, really. And that need is what drove me here. That's why I'm here, and I can speak to you guys from here. So and so it's that, and mostly it's the vulnerable stories, the uncomfortable conversations that I felt I wanted to hear more, but I felt like I wanted to see people have more, because in most of our families we don't really talk about things that matter. We kind of act like we do, but we never do. So I like to think of myself as that drunk uncle who's gonna, hey, who's, people will be pointing fingers saying, you are such a bum, and then it's gonna be, oh, you are calling me a bum now. Your wife is with a neighbor, and you might not even be the father to your two kids, or you're like, basically, I like to think of myself as that kind of person where I'm forcing people to look where they don't want to look, right? Because it's necessary.
It's so interesting you say that. I remember a couple of years ago, here at Macondo, there was a Cape Verdean author called Dina Salucio. She wrote The Mad Women of Serrano. And she was saying that to be a mad woman is to have freedom, because people dismiss you. And when they dismiss you, you can speak about whatever you wish and be who you are truly. So I love that analogy also of the drunken uncle. It sounds like there's also a freedom that comes from that. So thank you, Dorphanage. So Natasha, Dorphanage's poetry came to him through Timberlands and the streets. How did your writing find you, and what was the form that found you first? And take us through that journey.
Hi, everyone. My writing came about as an avenue of expression. That's where it all started. I was also pretty reticent growing up, not very expressive. I was the quote unquote weird kid sometimes. Yeah, just at the corner doing my own things. And of course, internally, there was a lot going on. There was a lot going on. And I had, similarly, similar to Dolphinage, I had to find a way to let it out so that it couldn't be so much in my head. When you have a lot of pressure inside you and you want to let people know different things. Yes, that's how it came to me as expression. Yeah, it came to me as expression, and I started writing what I was feeling. Then people started relating to what I was writing. So, yeah, basically that.
And did you start with nonfiction or fiction? Because you also write in so many forms. What's been your exploration of these different forms?
Fiction, actually. I love giving this story. I used to read a lot growing up. I've grown up in a family of readers, and I used to be this kid who you go to the supermarket and you go with your parents to the book section. Instead of taking them to the toy section, you're like, I want these books. I want the River Wimpy Kid. I want Enid Blyton's books. I want this one and this one and this one. So that used to be the thing. And one time we went to the supermarket, and by the time we got home, I had finished reading the book. So I was like, oh my God, will I tell them again to go and get me another book the next time we go to the supermarket? Yeah, so I decided to try and write my own stories. But of course, I already knew what was going on because it's my own stories. But that's how I stumbled into writing, basically. Yes.
Thank you, Natasha. Dorechi, what about you? What's been your journey to this moment?
So for me, I started writing after I read a story in Form 2. A friend of mine came from the holidays, and he'd written a short story. And I was so intrigued. I've been a reader from Binocular, Goosebumps. I've been reading those books, but I'd never thought I'd start writing. So when I read that, it intrigued me because this is just your classmate and he can write well. So why can't I? So I started writing from there. And before that, I was writing everything: comedy, horror. Became a before I started writing psychological horror, I think Edgar Allan Poe, Lovecraft, they're the ones who inspired me. And poetry, it's I've started with haiku because I wanted to tell my story in just three sentences. And for horror, it was a Reddit, 2 sentence. Yeah, it's a Reddit. So you just write 2 sentences, and you're supposed to capture the a reader's mind. That's why I started. For poems, it's Atticus. I don't know if you know. Yeah, Atticus inspired me to start writing poems.
No, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Atticus.
Oh, Atticus. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Atticus started. I I've read all his books, and it's so inspiring. And nobody is very anonymous. Personally, I'm a shy writer. This is my first literary event, and I think it's good. They have.
Thank you. We were just saying before that if you're going to have a first literary event, Macondo is the place because there's so much love in this community, and it's really full of people who love reading and writers. So, yeah.
Yeah, so Edgar Allan Poe, Lovecraft have inspired me to start writing psychological horror. Yeah, and even Stephen King too. But mostly, I think I prefer writing psychological anything I can write. I write in fiction, so most of the time you'll find I'll write maybe science fiction, but it will have some psychological horror within it.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thank you. So I had a whole bunch of questions prepared, but then we started having a conversation before we got on here. So I'm going to jump onto that conversation because I thought it was really interesting. We were talking about kind of just where we are in Kenya in this moment and like what we've been feeling as Kenyans over the last little while. And I'm kind of curious from each of you, like, how are you contending with this moment as a writer and as a Kenyan writer?
I think for me, really, like when the protest happened last year, it felt like a validation, right? It's like I was this lone wolf howling to the moon for such a long time, because these are things I'd been articulating in my work since I think 2012, 2013, right? Yeah, I've written a lot about that, like just trying to sensitize people on what's going on, trying to capture the frustrations of the Kenyan populace um, in my own way, and then just sharing my work, performing, doing shows and, sharing on social media and all that. So when it finally happened, um, and because also before that, like before the 2022 elections, like there was this cloud of hopelessness because of the voter apathy that happened. So for the people who are active, even the older generation, are feeling like, is it all lost for this country? Because the young people seem totally disinterested. But now when they finally, like the Gen Zs and the millennials turned social media into these political education platforms, like, and within months you could see the basically the heightened awareness that had taken over, and people finally willing to step out in the streets. Because even before the June protest, there was the end femicide protest early in the year, and then there was thousands of people in the streets. So I think for me, it felt like validation in that finally, here is a generation that's willing to answer the call that we've been, a few of us have been, rallying. And for quite a while, I couldn't write like the all of last year because it felt like writing felt like deja vu. It felt like I'm repeating things I've said before. So I was like, I'll leave it to the writers or, and the artists who are in that space, who can respond to that moment to do it. I've already done quite a lot, but, of course I participated. I stepped out in the streets. I, and echoed what everybody else was saying. And now it's just now, like this year, that I've been able to kind of go back into those, because for me, I'm that kind of writer who I have to sleep on what's going on and then just kind of make it, have it make sense to me, and also like try to see what unique perspectives, right, can come out of that, because also you don't want to do it just for the sake of doing it, or because you're responding to the trending thing, and then kind of lose out on the nuances, that are happening. So, because more than just being the reflections, we are really the hammers that are shaping history, as artists, So, even when you're writing, like it's just like I'm trying to get people to see things from like a different kind of perspective that they probably would miss out on because of the excitement, the sensations of the moment. Yeah, so, but I feel, like right now I feel like I'm one of those people, even as things are getting very bleak, I'm very hopeful, After last year, I was like, yeah, we really are on the right trajectory, because also the way we've gotten here, it's taken decades and decades of indoctrination, decades of oppression, exploitation, and you can't expect us to reverse that in a day, But somebody say, there are decades when nothing happens, but there are weeks when decades happen. And I think for both Junes, last year and this year, like decades happen in those months, so.
Yeah. And I think it's so true that there's some writers that write in out of the frothy heat of the moment, and some that need to let it sort of sit and marinate, and then later, are able to come out with work. For you, Natasha, I'm curious, what kind of writer you are, and if also in terms of this moment, are you writing to the politics of the moment? Are you writing around it? Like, what are you interested in exploring?
Well, at this moment that we're experiencing whatever is going on in the country, I look at this from an angle of hope, hope, and trying to find ways to still hold ourselves gently in the middle of everything that's going on. Because if we don't hold ourselves gently, we have the danger of becoming numb to things going on around us. And once you become numb in the heat of the moment, everything just, it's like smoke. Everything just, yeah. So basically, I look at this from an angle of hope. Hope is what I want, or rather what I have been expressing in my work, to give people a different type of view. It's not that everything is so horrible. Like, of course, everything is horrible, and everyone knows that. It's, oh God, don't even want to go there. But looking at hope for a better future. Yes.
And I think that's something you do really beautifully in your nonfiction work, like in the essays. I find that your work is so tender in that space specifically. Is there a way in which the feeling in your fiction is different from the feeling in your nonfiction that you're exploring?
Not entirely, because my fiction has not even bits, chunks of myself inside it, even though people might not know about that. It is what's inside me, and I like to think of myself as a sponge sometimes. I absorb the things going on around me, the things going on in my community, and they synthesize with what goes on inside me, and I apply pressure on it. And whatever comes out is a combination of me and my environment. And I believe this really reflects the current state of things. Yes.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank
I
you.
mean, you bring up this idea of hope, and I'm looking at Dorechi, who writes psychological horror. And I'm wondering how hope and horror sits, how they kind of play around each other, and what it kind of says about this moment.
The first thing is I write psychological horror because it shows us the human mind, or the fears we have. It's what is happening around the world. So it doesn't try to sugarcoat it or anything. It just shows us how people behave in certain situations. Sometimes when you write about somebody like a schizophrenic, sometimes you don't know what happens. And so when I try to write, I try to show sometimes they are not the ones causing the fear. Even them, sometimes they go through that fear of having a mental breakdown or something. So for me, I think it's the opposite of Natasha. I try to show people how people go through different psychological issues or something. Yeah.
So I'd love to give the audience a chance to experience some of your writing, some of your work. And, interestingly enough, I love, one thing I love about panels is you get to experience kind of a body of work in conversation with each other, and it gives you a lens that maybe you wouldn't have in otherwise. So I began with Dorechi's work, and as he mentioned, it was psychological horror. And then all of a sudden, as I moved on to Natasha's work and Dorphanage's work, they all felt like horror to me. And I think part of it is that we're in a moment that feels in some ways horrifying. And when I looked at the work from the lens of horror, I experienced the horror through different aspects. So I'd like to share some of the readings to give you a feel of that and see what your feeling is from it. We'll begin with Dorechi's Commonwealth Short Story Prize nominated work. Dorechi has asked me to read this section because it's a little bit of a longer section. The story is A Room Full of Teddy Bears. What I think is really fascinating about this piece of work is the point of view, as you'll see, takes what is already a pretty horrifying situation, but the fact that the audience, we as the audience, know something that the protagonist does not is kind of what makes it all the more horrifying. It's available online on Ada, and it's really a beautiful story. This is an excerpt from A Room Full of Teddy Bears. Mr. Ube, my teacher, tries to get the other kids to play with me in the classroom. And they do for a little while. But when he's not around, they run back to the sunlit field, leaving me in the shade again. I try to sneak into the sunlight now and then, just to feel what it is like, but Mr. Ube always stops me. Your skin is like a butterfly's wings, delicate. And wings like that need to be kept safe, he says, when I try to run into the sun. I know he means well, but sometimes it feels like I'm trapped by my own skin. He says the word delicate just right, like it is easy. I wish I could say big words like that too, the way he does. Despite my struggle with reading and speaking in English, he reassures me that one day I will be better at it. I hope he's right, because I want to be a teacher like he is. So when I cannot go out, Mr. Ube sits with me in class. He brings books and we read them together. When I stumble over the hard words, he helps me intone them until I get them right. I like those moments, even though sometimes I look out at the other kids and wish I could be there too, running free in the sun. When it is time to go home, Mr. Ube stays with me until Mama comes to pick me up. I can never go home alone. Mama says there are people, she calls them demon people, who might try to take me. She does not know that I heard her and my aunt whisper about it late one night when they thought I was asleep. They talked about a time when I was little that some people broke into our house and tried to take me. If it was not for Papa, they would have taken me to who knows where. Mama cried when she told me that story because Papa left us that night, and that is why she is always so sad. I chose an excerpt without spoilers, but honestly, when you need to read the story because the horror comes in later. But you can feel the foreboding, right? All right, so Natasha, the excerpt that I'd love for you to share with us is from a short story called Passion Bowl. And you'll tell us where it's published so we can also go and read it. And I think the horror for me in this story is the horror of getting a taste of your dream life only for it to be snatched away. There's something like deeply horrifying in that for me. Will you share with us an excerpt of that story? Here you go.
So this is Passion Bowl. It's found on Cosmorama magazine. Cosmorama magazine. The day before he left his body, he was roused by his neighbor's dog barking at his other neighbor's rooster. He felt exasperation shoot up inside him, like a thermometer exposed to temperatures outside its operating range, and balled up his fists, scrunching his eyes as he struggled to open them. The mixture of crowing and barking etched a scowl on his face, and he cursed under his breath, reaching for his cell phone. 4:58 a.m. 2 minutes were enough for him to wake up more serene, but his day had already begun, so he pushed his duvet off his midriff, along with his blue bed sheets. As he bubbled with irritation at his neighbors, he wondered why they still kept animals at their residences, despite there being animal storage facilities in town that were way cheaper than maintaining the animals yourself. Kenyans had always been suspicious of innovation, and he understood them to a degree. but there had been no catch in letting the government maintain your animals for you. His chicken and 2 cows were stored at the Nairobi Central Storage Facility, and he received milk and eggs every week in his mailbox. It was cost efficient, and he didn't have to deal with chicken poop.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you. And repeat for us where it's published, please.
Cosmorama.
Cosmorama.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Dorphanage, the piece that I'd love for you to share an excerpt from is Minority Report, which was, I think, written in 2016. And I think this for me is kind of the horror of the political, with a capital P. And what's wild is, as you'll hear it was written in 2016, and I think it's experienced a resurgence from last year. The horror of maybe being in the same situation almost 10 years later. Would you share an excerpt and maybe thoughts if you have?
Okay, all right, that's good. Bega imaturo. Maturo jakamatete mangotore na ikombe. Ikombe biankia bikojero biondo bitonga. Itonga bikareja iro biankia. Nkia katiko kurira matigari. Matigari ja wadani. Wadani bwajo kiro kura itetari na chia toroba tetu wadana dere ni amani. Amani ipatikani base mtaani. Mtaani maligufa ziko full volume ndo drown sauti za vilio za wenyeji wananja. Njaa ni soundtrack na beats ni footsteps za raia kwa streets. Tomboya alidedi for a reason ilikuwa enough kwa mtu fulani kucommit treason zimekuwa committed, lakini perpetrators bado hawajaona mlango ya prison ni homestead kwa petty criminals na innocents alike. Na unlike maadili za law school, hapa hela ndina mwanani ndo innocent na si innocent walai sijaielewa nini funny na jokes za hawa watu matimes hizo jokes ni sisi zina kejeli na haifai najichunga na mtu bado ninafaa kunichunga imanishi nikiuliza maswali ndo sasa unataka kunifunga juu nimeuliza maswali yanadunga juu uwezi aleza liendapi mahindi tulivuna lakini watu wanakufa njaa juu hakuna unga na mavuno tulieka kwa store na tukafunga tukakupea keys kama custodian anatuambie ampataje pesa ya kununua keja runda. Umenunua nyumba runda na mama mboga mtaani haizi fika bei ya unga ilipanda venye budget ilisomwa na waziri akasema uchumi umepanda kwa nani kama serikali saidia. Ilishageuka national anthem ni ombi la nani kama raia Turkana wako fasting by force.
Thank you. I hope you got a feel for what I meant, all the nuances and textures of horror. Before I welcome questions from the audience, I think this was the panel description was a big ask, many things to cover. And I'm kind of curious about this idea of inherited forms. You all write in so many different forms, from spoken word to essay and fiction to poetry, microfiction. Are there ways in which you're kind of bending or breaking these forms for this moment or this audience or for what you're interested in writing about? Maybe Natasha, we can start with you.
Well, I mentioned I started off writing fiction, but at some point I realized that the way I was writing was more edged towards poetic prose. So again, I stumbled into poetry. So I started breaking down the prose into poems, and now very recently I've stumbled into poetry films. So I just keep on stumbling into different things. I guess it's the point of exploration. I would talk about the poetry film section because music, combining music and words, there's just something about how human beings relate to music. So music, voice, words, yeah, that's basically my own.
Is this, I think, like when I read your work, it's this feeling that comes through, and whatever form it takes, the feeling feels like what your voice is. Does that make sense? Do you find, how do you arrive at the form? Do you start at like that I want to write a poem or I want to write a fiction piece, or do you start with the feeling? Like, what's your process?
My process begins very spontaneously. I could be seated here right now and I look at one of our lovely audience members here and I start getting an itch in my brain. I want to write about, let's say what, the very nice green dress over there and the nice lady there. And it keeps on ringing inside my head, ringing inside my head. That's when I take out my notes app. Actually, yesterday during the screening, I started getting an itch in my brain. So I was struggling between reading the subtitles and writing. I was just like, oh my God, I have this thing in my brain, it's disturbing me. Yeah, so that's how most of my writing starts, as an itch in my brain. It starts and it keeps on bothering me and bothering me. So I put it down. I have quite a lot of disjointed phrases in my notes app, on Google Docs. Then eventually, when I want to write a larger piece, I sit down, and then I start building layers around it, just like an onion. You know, an onion has quite a lot of layers. So I start with the core of it, then I start building stuff around it. Then, depending on how I feel and depending on what's going on around me, it can morph into an essay, it can morph into a poem, or a larger fiction piece. Yes.
That's beautiful. It sounds almost like sculpting, like you gather and then you kind of see where it takes you. I think one of the things that I really love about the Kenyan literary space in general, and a thing I think we've been leaning into deeper, is this idea that we don't have to be pigeonholed into one form. I think it's really special about Kenyan writers is that, you know, and maybe part of it came, I don't know whether it's intrinsic to how we tell stories in this space or whether it came from an infrastructure that didn't allow you to specialize. So you kind of had to do a little bit of everything. But I do love how much freedom I think Kenyan writers take in just this exploration and a refusal to stick to one form. Dorechi, what about with you? Like when you're thinking about form, because it's interesting, you know, your psychological horror and then your poetry is so different. It's so different from the, like, it's so different. How are you kind of playing with form and?
Okay, mostly for the poetry, I think I write more because I was influenced with one articles influenced me. That's when I started. But for the psychological horror, I started with 2-sentence horror stories because I wanted to give that punch. When the reader reads that, they keep asking what happens next. Yeah, so that's for the psychological horror, I think. Even for me, A Room Full of Teddy Bears, it was a story in the making from 2017. Yeah, I think I read it from either the East African or the Nairobian, I don't remember well, but I remember the blue color. So I've been writing about it, and it has changed a lot. From 2017, I was thinking about writing it as an activist, you know, trying to tell their story, but as it morphed, when I saw about the Commonwealth short story, that's when I thought, that story might make sense. And then I'd read incidents around the house. That's where my POV came from, because the POV was something else altogether before I read that book. So my POV came from that, and that was in October last year.
How did your POV change? What did you read? Sorry?
The POV was supposed to be of a guy.
Okay.
Yeah, he was being auctioned. He knew what was happening.
I see.
Yeah, but I changed it so that at least it gives you that.
That's where the horror comes in fully.
Yeah.
And I do remember really a moment I don't remember the year, but now that you mention it, there was a moment where there was a real fear regionally. I think it was Kenya and Tanzania specifically. I really don't want to give it away. So when you read the story, you'll remember this conversation. Dorphanage, you've been in the scene for a long time. I mean, I think maybe 15 years. You'll tell us. And when I think as spoken word artist, how are you playing with form, both in terms of, like you say, you've been influenced by hip hop, but also Kenya has had its own spoken word kind of dynamics evolving?
I would say, like, on a larger context, I think, and I feel like it's not just really about me. It's really a thing about the generations we find ourselves in. The millennials, the Gen Zs. It's kind of like we found very structured ways in which people were living, but then ways that were not sustainable, right? And I think in that quest to really kind of find out how do we belong here, basically, right? Because for most of our parents' generations, if you went to school, you're pretty much guaranteed a job, right? But then we get here and the job market is oversaturated, so you might have your masters and still living under your parents' roof, and so there's all that contending with this reality because there was a goal set for you, and then you get to the goalpost, and they tell you, oh, you're not there yet. They have shifted it. And then you get there again, they shifted it, right? So, and I think, when you contend with such reality, you're forced to reevaluate what you know, what is there. Because, and I think that is the way, like now, even us as writers, it's like there was this way in which we were taught literature that felt so rigid, that felt so, like, okay, I get it, but then it feels, why does it feel like a box? Like, why does it feel like I'm supposed to be able to express myself here, but why is it so hard for me to express myself, right? And so you just, at some point you're like, no, let me just find other ways in which I can go about this, right? And I think we're lucky to have come up also in a generation where it wasn't just happening here, because even when I think about hip hop is really like an urban folk art, right? It's like, it's like what slangs are. Slangs are urban vernaculars, like they're urban mother tongues. It's like you throw all these people that are multicultural in the same space, and they have to figure out what cuts across each and every one of them, and they come up with something that's uniquely theirs, and all these people are coming from different places with different inspirations. So all those inspirations collide and they become this all new way of life and this all new way of expression. And I think in that way, so that's how even my style now, I feel like, because I was like, I don't want to, I appreciate literature as it's taught and all, but at the same time, I don't find it useful to me in that way, right? So how do I express myself in a way that feels true to me, right? With the few lessons I've learned here and the lessons that I'm learning from other places, and just articulate my feelings, articulate my thoughts, tell the stories I want to tell, right? And with that, I feel like, we've kind of bended styles, bended forms into new forms, all right? Maybe we don't have new words for them yet, but whether we call it spoken word, whether we call it, poetry, performed poetry, whether we call it, fiction, flash fiction, whatever we want to call it, essentially, it just captures something that is very human, and we are all in a quest for, identity. We're trying to resolve our crisis because there's so many crises from the personal to the collective amongst us, and we're just looking for ways in which we can, make sense of it all. And by doing that also, we're kind of drawing everybody else to also like deal with that particular reality and make sense of it.
Thank you, Dorphanage. I think one of the things for me that really speaks to the writers in this moment is really this freedom. I think I'm not sure that we would have seen a panel like this 10 years ago at a literary festival where you have someone writing psychological horror and poetry, an essayist, someone working in video poetry and fiction, short stories, a spoken word artist, all in the same space. I think there's a claiming of freedom that is really beautiful about this moment in the Kenyan literary scene. And I'm so excited to see what else you'll write. At this point, the stage manager is telling me, time, so let me open out to the audience. We'll do 2 at a time. And if you could please keep your questions or comments brief. I see one over there. Let's start with you. And one other here, and then we'll move from there. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My question is about submissions. When the authors were introduced, we learned that they have pieces in various magazines. In African literature, we rarely talk about the submission process, and yet publishing is a major challenge. In my country, Zambia, there are no traditional publishers. When you see books, they're mostly self-published. When you talk to the writers, they don't even know much about submitting. So I want to find out, what's your submission process? How do you submit? What are the techniques that you use to get your work out there? How do you manage rejection? What magazines do you send your work to? Are you sending your manuscripts to publishers? Let's talk about submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. Thank you so much. And we'll take one more here, and then we'll invite responses.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I believe it was Dorphanage who mentioned that literature as taught in, I'm assuming 844, is not great. So my question to all of you is twofold. One, what was your experience with English literature versus Fasihi in high school? And two, how do you engage with Kiswahili literature, Fasihi, right now versus how did you engage with it in high school? Thank you.
So much. Okay, let's start with submissions. I think Dorechi and Natasha specifically, how do you approach the submission process, and maybe some tips?
Okay, for me, the submission for a room full of teddy bears, it was an easy process. I think Commonwealth has streamlined the process, but I use Scrivener to write, so it always does a lot it makes it easier to follow the guidelines, from the fonts, the spacing. Most of the submissions are 2-line spaced. The heading is supposed to be in capital letters, and sometimes they ask you not to put your name in there. So that's my process.
And did you write A Room Full of Teddy Bears for Commonwealth specifically, or did you start writing it and then when Commonwealth opened you were like, let me submit it?
The first time I was writing it for Afrotondo, I even got the idea of a mask. They had a theme about masks, but somebody told me it would be better off in the Commonwealth. Okay. That's why I sent it there.
Okay, so you had the story first and then you looked for kind of where to submit.
Yeah, but it was a month before.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when I started writing it.
Have you had experience with other spaces for submission?
Okay, the spaces I've had is with, I think, International. but I think I've gotten 2 rejections. Yeah. So you just read your story and move on.
Read your story and move on.
Yeah, you just read your story and move on.
There's a writers group that I sometimes eavesdrop on, and this thing of rejections, like, you know, you have spreadsheets where it's like rejection, 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 rejection. It's like collect 50 rejections, but then the one makes it through, and sometimes that's the one that needs, you know, that makes it through and then opens the door. And I think also sometimes with publications, sometimes it's just maybe the fit isn't what they're looking for. It's not so much speaking on the quality of the story as much as it is, you know, the thing that they're curating for the journal or the magazine. You know, the fit isn't there. And Natasha, you've been widely published. Tell us about your submission process and what you've learned.
I started submitting my work in around 2020. Yeah, around 2020 there, but I quickly realized that my work wasn't very conventional. So I used to get a lot of rejections. And I found a magazine that accepted my work finally, Second Skin Mag, in 2021. And I was very happy. There's nothing like receiving a congratulations. Your story has been accepted for. It was a very amazing feeling, and I think ever since I've just been chasing the feeling. So I'm published in about 6 anthologies. The 7th one is upcoming very soon, and online I have, I'm not sure how many there are. There are quite a number online that have been published, but how I search for places to submit, I usually use Writing Africa, you know James Mura's website, Writing Africa. Then I also use Chail Subs, which is a huge database of lots of magazines that accept different types of submissions. And yeah, you can basically find a place for your story to fit. Rejection, I have no idea how many there are. I have no idea because I've really sent out a lot of submissions. Yeah. So, yeah, the journey for me has been interesting. I think at some point I even got a bit numb to the rejection because I used to sit down. I have a list of like 20 places that I want to submit. I check if they want simultaneous submissions. Then I select. I start sending them out, and then I even forget about them. And most of the times, I write a story, let's say for a specific call. I send it to that place, and they don't accept it. Then another place picks it up. That happens quite a lot. Yeah. Like the Cosmorama one, it was supposed to be, there's a call for an anthology by Makena Onjerika. This is 2023, late 2023, yeah, for an Afrofuturistic anthology. That's why the story itself has very futuristic elements. Yeah, and all those books over there are books that have my work inside. And yeah, the 2 Kwani books are, I was first published in the one on the far right. I don't know the second one. There's so many sometimes I just... Yeah, but actually we're having a session in the afternoon with Kwani, so you guys should be there as well.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you, Natasha. Do you write and then look for places to submit, or do you say this is where I'd like to be published and then write for that publication?
When I first started, I used to write, then find places where my work can fit. Because it's the same thing that you said. Sometimes you send your work out and it gets rejected. And it's not because it's bad. It's because it's probably not something that they're looking for in that specific magazine. There's so many magazines that you can send your work to. And just because you receive a rejection from one of them doesn't mean that your work is bad. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and Writing Africa, James Murwa's space is a great place for opportunities for publication. Dorphanage, maybe you can speak to this question around your experience of English literature versus Kiswahili, perhaps in high school and then now.
Yeah, I think unless you had dreams of becoming a teacher or like furthering your studies in literature, like if it all felt really like a lot of work, because and in so many ways, I always felt like you need to choose between either or, and maybe high school not much, but primary school I know, for example, we couldn't even speak in Swahili as much as we wanted to, because there were days when it's exclusively English, probably 3 days in a week, and then maybe there are days when you have leeway to a bit of Swahili, and you cannot speak mother tongue kabisa, utabebeshwa monitor, like which was such an embarrassing thing to do, which is really a colonial hangover that still lives on to this day, unfortunately. But I think for me, I'd say like it's stepping out of that, like conventional idea of literature, conventional idea of fasihi, that I found my voice as a writer, right? Not within it. Within it just felt like it was taking away my voice. I wasn't able to express myself within that space. And I think that's part of the reason probably I don't even do a lot of submissions, is because I feel like it's too much for me. Like it's just, okay, I don't mind the rejections. It's okay. Of course, you want 10 submissions and there's 1,000 people willing to submit. Of course, you're gonna have to pick either way, right? So it doesn't matter. Whatever criteria you use, there are still people who are going to get rejections, more people than the ones who are going to be accepted. So that will happen either way. But I think it's just a matter of understanding the process as well. It's important to understand the process so that even if you reject the process, then at least you have an idea of what it is, right? And I think for me it was that, like just understanding the process of, and understanding even the art forms. Like you have to understand poetry in the traditional sense as well. If you have to break the rules or bend them, you don't want to break rules you don't know, right? So because essentially you're gonna be put on the spot sometimes, and you must have enough information to get around it, right? Because you have to back up your reasons, basically. And so for me, I think it's just like knowing that I want to express myself in the best way I can, and I don't want to have to think about, how do I write, like, because because I think for me it's the story, or whatever, the feeling, the thought, they come first. The reason, I have something to say, so how to say it will come like second. It would be secondary to that factor, right? What techniques I use, what language I use, because I write in 4 different languages. I'll write in Swahili. I can write in like proper Kiswahili Sanifu. I write in Sheng predominantly. I can write in English as well, and I write in Kimeru too, right? I'm kind of pushing myself to write more in Kimeru, because hey, I'm a big fan of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and I agree with the politics of language, from his point of view as well, and anyway, it's part of the decolonial process. So I think it's a lot of, just there isn't one way, but there is so many ways to go around that. And as far as that, I feel like now we've kind of preceded the academy in that regard. So it's up to the academy to catch up with us and figure out like what new ways we're approaching literature and fasihi, because we don't fit the traditional sense of those particular, forms and and styles. So if the academy feels the need to, they're gonna do their work and try to articulate that in an academic way. But for us, we're just knowledge producers, and we continue to produce knowledge, and express ourselves, and tell the stories we need to tell.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, the academy is always playing catch up, right? It's always the one that follows the creators. We have, I think, time for 2 more questions. We have one here and one at the back over there.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As a teacher of English and literature in high school, narrowing down to literature, I have interacted with students in poetry. And just as our panelists say, it just seems off. And actually yesterday they were telling me, on Friday, they were saying, Madam, this thing is not our thing. And just to ask, as poets, how can you make sure that the works you've written appear in our books? Because mostly we interact with the poems that were written very, very many days ago, and the students can't resonate with what is happening. I try telling them that poetry is easy because I am a poet myself, but they can't see that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, my response is almost like, can you teach the work in your classroom, right? We have 3 poets right here, but I will invite the panelists to answer in a moment. We have one more at the back, and then I think we had one on that side.
Thank you. AI, tool, or trap for you?
I feel like we need a drinking game where the moment AI is mentioned, take a shot. All right, so AI, tool or trap, and then our third question over there.
Natasha, hi. You've mentioned that yesterday when the panel was going on, you felt like there's something you need to write. As writers, we get most of our inspiration from everyday living. How do you balance when to stay in the moment and to get inspiration to write, but still be able to enjoy what is going on?
What a lovely question. Thank you. Let's start with that one, Natasha.
Well, in terms of how do I balance, the answer is I don't. It's a bit hard to balance between separating moments of creation and living, because at this point of my life, I feel like I'm just a tool of creation. There's so many stories around me to create, and sometimes I feel like there's an overload, like what you just mentioned. Where I was watching the movie, trying to look at the subtitles and thinking of ideas, and I feel like the beauty is in that struggle inside me. Yes. So I don't really balance it. I just go with the wave and see where it's going to lead me.
Thank you, Natasha. The next question was AI, tool or trap? Would anyone like to take that on? Dorechi, I see you reaching for your mic.
I've always thought about AI. We've been using AI from when you've been using a word processor, you've been using AI, but it was low form. OpenAI is a higher form of it. So I think using AI is not a bad thing, because I think the first people, when the typewriter came, people who wrote physically thought it was a bad thing, but it wasn't. It helped. So I think AI can be used to help in forms of sentence creation. Sometimes you have that picture in your head, but you don't know how to put it in words. Sometimes spelling mistakes, you can use AI. That's not a bad thing. But I think using AI to write a whole story, that's where the problem starts. But using AI for sentence correction, we've been doing it. It's just now it's a higher form of AI than before. When you use a word processor, you're using AI. But yeah, so it is a trap and it's not a trap at the same time. Because sometimes you'll just go there and when you start, you put in your prompt or something, it gives you a story and you're like, why don't I just copy paste the whole thing and put it over here? Yeah, so that's a trap. But when you use it for this slow form of like spelling mistakes, maybe sentence structure or something like that, then I don't think it's, personally, I don't think it's a bad thing, because it makes you productive, more productive than you could have been without it. Yeah.
Thank you. Natasha, any thoughts?
Personally, I am not a fan of using AI to write at all. And okay, you do have a point in terms of, correcting stuff, but as an editor as well, I'm just very anti-AI in writing, generally. Yeah.
Definitely.
I think as somebody who appreciates process a lot, right? I think for me, I would say it's more a trap than it is a tool. Like, and also when you start to look at the regulation and policies of it, like just because I feel like the sense of ownership, the fact that a lot of the people using AI, they're really like using it from the consumer end of things, and as far as the cash flow, like the money is only going to the top, right? Whoever owns the AI company, softwares, whatever. Like, so because of that, also like, and the fact that even a lot of the policymakers can't even grasp the idea of what's going on, like in terms of now the technology and everything. So people are just signing off to things that they don't understand, and then you're setting up entire, populations to, to basically be exploited by very few people, right? And so it's useful when it's useful, but if you look at now the implications when it goes untamed, like it's just too much. Like it's so much counterproductive on so many levels. Even when it's because essentially, like Natasha is saying, essentially, if it's you can edit your work yourself, so meaning you don't necessarily need an editor, but there's a reason there is an editor to start with, right? And so we'll let that pass without necessarily thinking like how, where does this person goes, right? And I think, okay, it's happened with almost every technology that has come up, but then the other technologies that came before this didn't happen at a point where the world was literally a global village, where this advancement is happening in a snap, right? So some people are just pretty much getting caught in between the machine, and there's nothing they can do about it because they are totally unprepared. They're totally, incapable of dealing with that current reality. So I feel for me that the tragedy of it is that things are happening at such a rate that the majority of people they wouldn't even know how to respond to. And because of that, as it might work for a few people, for the larger population, it's not really helping much. Like the analogy I like to use is that Boeing might produce the next big thing tomorrow. They might produce the next big plane, whatever, Boeing 999. But if you couldn't afford to fly on a Boeing 600, you still don't afford to fly now that they have an advanced plane, right? So if we can think about democratizing that, like making it sure like everybody can, it's at least there's some level of balance in how people get to interact with that technology, then it means we are leaving the majority of us behind, really, so that we can enjoy the privilege of exclusivity.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other danger is, so I come from the WordPress era where I had a blog on WordPress, and this was at a time when, of course, like bumping up against the limited publishing structures within the continent, when WordPress came about and blogs and Substack, and it very much opened up the space for you to cultivate your own audience and to put your work out there. And I'm also very AI suspicious, like Natasha. But I did put in a prompt, and so my blog was called Chanyado, and I put in a prompt and I said, write me a piece like Chanyado about heartbreak. And it wrote a piece that was terrifying to me because it just sucked the marrow out of 5 years of my presence on blog of Chanyado. And as I was reading it, I was like, this sounds like me. And now that all my work is available on WordPress, I'm really thinking about whether I should leave it out there. Maybe it's too late. I feel like I've lost a little bit my grasp of Chanyado. It also made me question myself as a writer, if I'm that easily replicable. Damn. So I think there are questions also around where your work is existing and the ways in which that voice can then be sucked up that we have to kind of contend with. Okay, last question, because I can see them waving at the back. The question was around how to get your poetry into teaching spaces. Is that a thing that you think about? Do you have strategies that you employ? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I think everybody has their role to play, right? Of course, the artists have to put their work out, but also it means whether it's KICD has to also become a bit more accommodating in terms of the work they produce as well. The teachers themselves have to go out of their ways, right? Because I have a friend of mine who's a literature teacher, right? And he uses like a lot of our work to teach, right? And he wrote his dissertation in campus on hip hop, right? So basically, I think everybody has a role to play in that way, and I as well, like there's the lady here who did at the University of Nairobi who did masters on some of our work and went on to do a PhD on our work, and that's because some of her lecturers were people who are familiar with our work, and they are the ones who suggested that you can, right? So basically, in that way, I think it shows everybody, like in whatever space you are, you can make sure there's more, there's more acceptance of this, and there's exploration of what's available out there, because essentially you're doing an injustice to yourself, you're doing an injustice to the children and the students you teach, if you don't expose them to what's happening in the contemporary world, right? Because by the time they're leaving school, then they're coming to do catch-up, right? Which they might not be able to do. But if you introduce them to this, it might not be examinable if the school syllabus and structure doesn't allow that, but at least they are aware of what's available, right? And I think it's the same thing that's happening on so many fields of education, where the curriculum is obsolete, right? And people now have to step out and you're told you can't help the job market simply because whatever you learned in school is not applicable now, right? Or you have to go through a whole other orientation process, after you've already done your internship and your whatever. So like you have to also go through like a probation period that's longer than usual, just so that you can become acquainted to the job market. So I think it's that way. Like.
Okay, thank you, Dorphanage. Everyone has a role to play. I'm looking at you, Mwalimu. Natasha, anything you'd like to add to that conversation?
It's the same thing for me. It's a question of proximity to power, proximity to influence. Because if you know if you have, what do you call it? If you're close to these people who create these syllabuses, you are likely to influence what they put in the syllabus. Yeah, it's just a question of proximity, to be very honest, because if we have people who are more intentional about the type of work that our kids consume, then more of the currently existing work can be put out there and not just work in the past. Because I feel like it's just a problem in Kenya generally about power, even in politics. The younger generation, the older generation, and that's just a very winded discussion.
And writing is dangerous, and curriculums don't tend to want to have danger in them. So I think that's the other thing, is that I think that's also what's very interesting about some of these journals and magazines and performances, these are dangerous spaces. Dorechi, last thoughts?
I think I'll just echo what Natasha said. I think the space is politicized. The way they choose the stories, they won't choose something from this era or something. They'll choose something from long ago. So I think it's just a politicized, the way they choose maybe the poems or anything, even the stories themselves, it's somehow politicized. And they can't choose a new writer. It's very, very hard to be chosen as a new writer. Even if you're making noise and everything, it's harder to be chosen as a new writer. Yeah.
Thank you, Dorechi. I think that's one of the things that's very powerful about festivals, about alternative spaces, is that it creates room for things that perhaps respectability or curriculums don't. And it was really wonderful to see students at the festival yesterday. Okay, I think we have to wrap, unfortunately, even though it feels like we could go on for another hour at least. I want to say thank you so much, Dorphanage, Natasha, Dorechi, and to the audience, and really to encourage you to check out their work online. A lot of their work is available online. It's been a really wonderful exploration to read them in conversation and to experience them in conversation. And to say thank you very much to each of you, and congratulations on the work that you're doing, and we can't wait to continue following it. And thank you to a very generous audience. And thank you to the sign language interpreter. We're very grateful.